Jaguar made one of the strangest moves in modern automotive history. It stopped building the cars people could actually buy, cleared out the models sitting at the center of its business, erased years of social media history, and then launched its new identity with a commercial that contained exactly 0 cars. No grille, no wheels, no engine, not even a headlight. This was Jaguar, a company whose racing machines once humiliated Ferrari at Le Mans. Introducing its future was something that looked more like a luxury fashion campaign than an automobile advertisement. And the really bizarre part is that this wasn't an accident. Jaguar wanted the disruption. It wanted the confusion. It wanted people to look at the screen and ask what on earth had happened to the company. The problem was that millions of them did exactly that. On November 18, 2024, Jaguar wiped its social media accounts clean. Decades of imagery, launches, racing heritage, sports cars, luxury sedans, all gone. Then came the replacement identity. The famous leaping cat was pushed away from the center of the branding. A new, minimalist wordmark appeared. Slogans followed about deleting the ordinary, breaking molds, living vividly, and above all, copying nothing. Then came the commercial. Brightly dressed models moved through surreal pink and yellow environments, while the product Jaguar had spent a century building was nowhere to be seen. The internet exploded. More than 100 million views reportedly piled up within 48 hours, fueled largely by people trying to understand what they were watching. Elon Musk summed up the confusion with a simple question: do you sell cars? And that question became brutal because Jaguar was entering a period where, increasingly, the answer was no. The campaign would have been controversial under normal circumstances. Running it while preparing to leave showrooms effectively empty turned it into something else entirely. Because branding can create curiosity. Branding can change perception. Branding can make an old company feel new. What branding cannot do is replace an actual product. 2 weeks later, Jaguar revealed the Type 00 concept during Miami Art Week. It was extremely long, extremely low, almost architectural, appearing in Miami pink and London blue. People compared it to everything from a Barbie accessory to a Cybertruck to an air conditioning vent. Jaguar executives essentially argued that getting a reaction was part of the mission. The company had spent years blending into the luxury market, and the new Jaguar was determined not to disappear into the background. Fair enough. There was still one enormous issue. Nobody could buy the Type 00. Nobody could order the production version. And Jaguar was already winding down the vehicles people could buy. To understand why that decision feels so radical, you have to remember what the name Jaguar used to represent. The story began in England in 1922, when a 21-year-old William Lyons became fascinated with a motorcycle sidecar he saw near his parents' home. He eventually persuaded the man who built it to go into business with him. Their operation was tiny. 3 employees and a boy worked above a shop, sometimes completing only one sidecar in a good week. But Lyons understood something about aspiration that would define Jaguar for decades. He wanted people to see one of his products and assume it cost far more than it actually did. By the late 1920s, the company had expanded into automobile bodies, including a design based on the humble Austin 7 that looked dramatically more expensive than its price suggested. Customers noticed. Orders followed. Then, in 1935, Lyons chose a new model name meant to communicate elegance, speed, and strength: Jaguar. The company itself still carried a different name at the time: SS Cars. Before the Second World War, those initials were simply initials. After the war, their meaning had become impossible for a respectable British manufacturer to carry. So in 1945, at a shareholders' meeting, Lyons changed the company's name permanently. Jaguar was no longer simply a model. Jaguar was the company. What happened next is why the modern reinvention has become so emotional for enthusiasts. In 1948, Jaguar introduced the XK120, powered by an engine whose early concepts had been developed by engineers while performing wartime firewatch duties. The car reached roughly 133 miles per hour, enough to make it the fastest production car in the world. Then Jaguar went racing. It won the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1951 and followed with victories in 1955, 1956, and 1957. Ferrari was there, Maserati was there, Aston Martin was there. Jaguar beat them. More importantly, the engine technology, proving itself under endurance racing punishment, was closely related to what customers could actually purchase. That made the marketing almost unnecessary. You did not need actors walking through an abstract landscape to explain Jaguar. The cars explained Jaguar. Then came 1961 and the E-Type. Malcolm Sayer, an aerodynamicist with an aircraft background, designed its shape through engineering principles, mathematics, and wind tunnel thinking. He didn't consider himself a stylist. The machine could approach 150 miles per hour, carried four-wheel disc brakes, and offered extraordinary performance for roughly half the cost of a comparable Ferrari. Enzo Ferrari famously praised its beauty. Frank Sinatra reportedly wanted one the moment he saw it. Steve McQueen owned one. This was William Lyons' original philosophy, pushed almost to perfection. Exotic car presence, genuine engineering, and performance that wasn't reserved exclusively for the ultra-rich. That historical Jaguar makes the empty showroom strategy so much harder to process. Of course, the brand's history wasn't one continuous victory lap. During the 1960s and 1970s, Jaguar became absorbed into the troubled British auto industry, and quality deteriorated badly. Electrical problems, rust, breakdowns, and inconsistent manufacturing created the reliability reputation that would stalk Jaguar for decades. Ford bought the company in 1989 and invested heavily. The vehicles improved, but profitability remained difficult. Then the 2008 financial crisis forced Ford to raise cash, and Jaguar was sold together with Land Rover to India's Tata Motors for a little more than $2 billion. Skepticism was immediate. Tata was associated with some of the world's cheapest cars. How could it protect a British luxury icon? For a while, the answer was surprisingly well. Tata poured billions into products, engineering, and manufacturing. The F-Type arrived in 2013 and immediately invited comparisons with the E-Type. Then the F-Pace SUV appeared in 2016 and rapidly became Jaguar's biggest seller, including in the United States. By the end of the decade, Jaguar was selling more than 180,000 vehicles worldwide annually. Then came the I-Pace in 2018, a fully electric SUV that beat Tesla's Model Y to market, won World Car of the Year, and demonstrated that buyers would accept an electric vehicle wearing a Jaguar badge. That detail matters. Jaguar did not need to destroy the old company to prove it could build EVs. It had already done it. By 2019, Jaguar certainly had problems, but it still had customers, products, dealerships, a successful SUV, a sports car people admired, and credible electric technology. Then came the plan that changed everything. In 2021, Jaguar announced a strategy called Reimagine. Going electric was only part of it. The more consequential decision was to leave behind virtually the entire segment Jaguar had spent decades occupying. Instead of competing directly with brands like BMW and Mercedes-Benz, the new Jaguar would move dramatically higher, aiming toward territory occupied by Porsche and Bentley, with prices potentially more than double what traditional Jaguar customers were accustomed to paying. Think about how many variables changed at once: powertrain, price, customer, competition, styling, brand identity. Jaguar wasn't renovating the house, it was demolishing it and planning to rebuild on the same address for different owners. The longtime professional who bought an XF, F-Pace, or F-Type because it delivered beauty and performance without Bentley money wasn't necessarily being asked to upgrade. That buyer was effectively being replaced. Risky, yes, but the truly extraordinary decision came next. Jaguar chose to stop producing the old lineup before the replacement cars were ready. Internally, the gap was described as a fire break, a deliberate separation between the previous Jaguar and whatever would come next. Through 2024 and 2025, the existing range disappeared. Sedans vanished. Crossovers vanished. The F-Type ended. Finally, the F-Pace, Jaguar's strongest American seller and the model doing much of the remaining work, reached the end as well. The final Jaguar of the old era rolled off the production line in December 2025. A black F-Pace created as a tribute to the final E-Type, which had also been black. Nearly a century of continuous car building ended deliberately. Now imagine being a dealer. You have represented Jaguar for 20 years, maybe 30. You renovated your facility because you were told an ambitious electric future was coming. You trained employees, you invested in equipment. Then customers arrive and ask what new Jaguar they can test drive. The answer is essentially nothing. You have concept imagery. You have a promise. You have a future launch date. What you don't have is a new car. This is where the strategy stops being an interesting branding experiment and becomes a brutal business gamble. A buyer shopping for a $90,000 luxury vehicle is not necessarily going to suspend the purchase for a year because Jaguar wants a clean psychological break with its past. They may walk across town and buy a Mercedes, BMW, Audi, or Porsche. Once that customer has moved into another brand's ecosystem, rebuilding the relationship is much harder. And Jaguar's competitors showed that there was another path. BMW introduced electric models such as the i4 and iX while continuing to sell its gasoline cars. Mercedes developed electric vehicles without immediately removing its traditional lineup. Audi expanded its EV range while familiar products remained in dealerships. Those companies attempted to move customers across a bridge. Jaguar removed the bridge before reaching the other side. Now, the claim that Jaguar sold literally 0 cars in America needs one important qualification. Old inventory didn't instantly disappear. Dealers still had leftover F-Paces and I-Paces, sometimes carrying enormous incentives. Discounts on conventional SUVs could reach several $1,000s, while combinations of incentives on electric models could become dramatically larger. But selling leftover inventory isn't the same thing as operating a current model lineup. There was nothing genuinely new to configure and order. The XE, once Jaguar's entry luxury sedan, sold only 6 units in its final year. 6. The broader decline was just as severe. Jaguar had exceeded 180,000 global sales around its 2018 peak. In its final full internal combustion era year, worldwide volume had fallen below 27,000, roughly an 85% collapse in 7 years. During 1 month of the European wind-down, Jaguar reportedly registered only 49 vehicles across the continent, more than 97% below the previous year. America made the optics even worse because the United States had been Jaguar's most important individual market, historically delivering well over 17,000 cars in stronger years and potentially representing around $1 billion in revenue. So no, the mathematically precise number may not have been 0. Strategically, however, Jaguar entered 2026 without an active conventional American lineup, without normal new car ordering, and with dealerships effectively waiting for a future product. For a luxury manufacturer in its largest market, that's remarkably close. Jaguar's defense is also worth hearing because this wasn't a conventional collapse where management woke up one morning and discovered customers had disappeared. The decline was planned. Jaguar stopped making the vehicles, so naturally registrations collapsed. Parent company Jaguar Land Rover was not bankrupt. Land Rover remained strong, and the broader business had generated substantial profits. The company had financial breathing room to attempt something radical. That makes the experiment more understandable. It doesn't automatically make it smart. Choosing to jump off a ledge doesn't change what gravity does next. And there are signs that even inside the organization, confidence in the original execution weakened. The advertising agency associated with the campaign was removed. The chief executive who oversaw the reimagined strategy retired. The creative chief closely associated with the rebrand was later dismissed, reportedly exactly 1 year after the Miami unveiling of the pink Type 00. Then, late in 2025, Jaguar Land Rover suffered another serious blow when a major cyber attack disrupted its global systems and halted what production remained. A difficult transition became even messier. But if you already own a Jaguar, there is another part of this story that matters more to you than logos or commercials, and it is sitting under the hood. Beginning around 2015, Jaguar Land Rover introduced the Ingenium engine family across a huge range of vehicles. Owners of 4-cylinder diesel Jaguars and Land Rovers from this period need to pay particular attention to the timing chain system. A timing chain is supposed to be the durable alternative to a belt. On some of these engines, however, chain stretch and wear to the plastic guides can become a serious problem. Material from those guides can contaminate the oil, and as the chain becomes progressively looser, engine timing can move out of specification. The warning sign can sound harmless, a metallic rattle for a few seconds immediately after a cold start, often disappearing once oil pressure builds. Owners sometimes hear it repeatedly and dismiss it as normal diesel noise. Don't. Reports frequently place the problem in roughly the 60,000 to 80,000 mile range, although maintenance history matters enormously. Extended oil change intervals can make things worse. So can repeated short journeys where the engine barely reaches full operating temperature. Catch the issue early and the repair is painful but survivable. Ignore it until the chain jumps or breaks and pistons can meet valves. At that point, you're potentially looking at an engine replacement. The layout adds insult to injury because the timing components sit toward the rear of the engine near the firewall, making access extremely labor-intensive and potentially requiring major drivetrain disassembly. That is why a chain problem that sounds small can produce an enormous invoice. If you own one of these cars, listen to it from cold with the radio off. If there is a distinct metallic rattle that fades after several seconds, have a qualified Jaguar Land Rover specialist inspect it, and use the correct oil at sensible intervals. On this engine, maintenance isn't cosmetic. It can decide whether the car survives. So what about Jaguar values now? The answer depends heavily on which Jaguar you own. Late F-types are already developing a different kind of status because they represent the end of Jaguar's traditional combustion sports car lineage. A clean final generation F-type is not something I'd panic sell simply because the new car business looks chaotic. Scarcity and historical significance can work in its favor over time. Ordinary sedans, F-Paces and E-Paces are more complicated. They remain used luxury vehicles carrying depreciation, maintenance costs, and a badge whose new car presence has weakened dramatically. If you're already considering selling one, waiting indefinitely for Jaguar's reputation to recover may not be the safest bet. Parts availability is less frightening than some owners assume. Jaguar Land Rover remains a major company, and many components and systems are shared with Land Rover products that remain in production and on the road in huge numbers. The more immediate concern is dealership coverage. A Jaguar showroom with no new Jaguars has an obvious economic problem. So expect consolidation, closures, or facilities increasingly centered around Land Rover. Finding a respected independent Jaguar specialist before something breaks is a smart move. And if you're thinking about buying a used Jaguar, the current confusion can actually work in your favor. Depressed values means some genuinely impressive cars cost far less than their original sticker prices suggest. Just buy the condition and the maintenance history, not the badge. Inspect everything, verify servicing, and if you're considering an Ingenium diesel, insist on hearing it start completely cold. Which brings us back to that commercial with no cars. Maybe Jaguar eventually makes the critics look ridiculous. Maybe the production version inspired by the Type 00 arrives, drives brilliantly, attracts wealthy new customers, and proves that disappearing for a year was the only way to erase decades of baggage. Luxury brands have reinvented themselves before. Jaguar's management would argue that slowly fading while selling fewer versions of the same old products was the greater danger. There is logic there. Jaguar had been declining for years. Competing directly with BMW and Mercedes had not produced sustainable scale. Doing something radical may have been necessary, but necessity doesn't prove that this particular gamble was correct. Jaguar's greatest cars became icons because the product created the identity. The XK120 didn't need anyone to explain why it was exciting. The Le Mans victories didn't require a branding manifesto. The E-Type didn't ask customers to imagine what Jaguar might become 18 months later. You looked at the machine, understood the proposition, and wanted one. The modern strategy has reversed that sequence. First came the identity, then the slogans, then the campaign, then the concept. The actual cars come later. That is why the zero-car commercial matters. It wasn't merely a strange advertisement. It was the perfect symbol of Jaguar's entire bet. Destroy the connection to what came before, create desire around an idea, and trust that the product will eventually justify the disruption. Genius or disaster? We won't know until those new Jaguars reach real roads and real customers start writing real checks. Until then, Jaguar remains one of the strangest automotive experiments happening anywhere in the world. A legendary manufacturer betting that becoming almost unrecognizable is the only way to become desirable again. If you've owned an XJ, XF, F-Type, F-Pace, E-Type, or anything else carrying that badge, tell me whether you think the leaping cat can genuinely return to America or whether Jaguar walked away from the very people who kept it alive. MotorsN follows the engineering, history, culture, and business decisions that determine what eventually ends up in your driveway. So subscribe if that sounds like your kind of story. Because whatever Jaguar becomes next, One thing is already certain: nobody can accuse it of choosing the safe route.